Solo queuing in Apex is a really tough thing to do, and a lot of players are always asking me about tips on how to improve and how to get better while solo queuing. And the truth is, you can do your absolute best and still fall short while solo queuing, but I've got 6 tips here that should help you get more kills and more wins while solo queuing. So let's get right into it. Tip number 1 is don't rely too heavily on your randoms. This is a very nuanced tip. At times you're going to need to lean on your teammates, but at other times, if you expect too much from them, you will be left disappointed. They are not always going to do what you think they are. They're not going to do what you want them to do in most scenarios, and that creates a really confusing way to play the game at times. Nonetheless, if you can just focus on the fact that they are there to basically take attention from the enemies, then you can learn to play off of that in the best way possible. There's nothing more annoying when you're solo queuing than when you see one of your teammates run up to a fight way ahead and they just expect that you're next to them and pushing with them, and they're relying on the fact that basically they've deemed themselves the leader and for the other 2 randoms to just follow. Now, I understand at times we've probably been on both sides of this at one time or another. We'll think our teammates are pushing with us, they aren't, and then we get a little disappointed or upset when we inevitably die because multiple enemies just shot us. There's a huge difference between that and just blindly running at fights, assuming your teammates are with you, and relying on the fact that they're just blindly following you, because that's not going to be the case. If you can't actually pay attention to where your teammates are going and what they're actively doing, then you are not setting yourself up for success while solo queuing. Actually, one of you in my comments put it very nicely. Random teammates aren't your teammates. They're just other players that can't shoot you. This is a really good motto to view how solo queuing actually is. Now, occasionally you will be pleasantly surprised by teammates who you feel like you can rely on, and maybe in that case you invite them the next game and finally build some continuity. But for the broad majority, they're going to let you down. So don't rely too heavily on them and just try to focus on what you can do to get better. Number 2, watch where your teammates are moving and watch their health and shield bar. This will tell you a lot of active info while you're dealing with fights or going into a fight. And I mean this in a very, very specific manner, especially when it comes to where they're moving. Remember, all it takes is for one player to be 10 feet too far ahead for them to get team fired by an enemy team. Now, I say this tip with the context that most of the time while solo queuing, your randoms aren't going to be saying anything. If you compare that to playing with 2 friends, most likely you guys will have better awareness about where one another is at. You'll probably be moving together towards a fight, away from a fight, or whatever it may be. But when it comes to solo queuing, you're not going to have that voice communication most of the time. And while your random teammate might have been with you previously, as you move forward or back up, they might go a different direction. And if you're not paying attention to that, you will find yourself in some bad scenarios. This sounds like such an obvious tip, but it's definitely the most important tip in my opinion. If you couple where they're moving to actively or not moving to in some scenarios, along with the fact that their health and shield bar will tell you what they're most likely going to do next, well, that can give you a lot of information about how to play your life. If you see your teammate very low, assume they're either going to go down or they're not going to be able to affect the fight because hopefully they're being smart and trying to find a safe spot to heal. If you see them really healthy moving up towards a fight and maybe you're missing some of your armor, then you can put together that they're going to take the most attention from these enemies, and you could actually play on the backup role behind them or on an off angle so that you're able to play off of the attention that your random teammate is garnering. This tip is actually the tip that has helped me improve solo queuing the most because it's a really, really active way to play the game. It's not passive in any means. You have to be really focused on the details about what your teammates are doing, and this tip also carries over and applies for when you do play with your friends. Because even at times while playing with people on voice comms that are your friends, you may assume that they're with you or that they're going to do X, Y, or Z, or they end up doing the opposite to that, and that just screws you up entirely. But if you can pay attention to your mini map, if your teammates are behind you or if they're in front of you, how far ahead are they, and where you know or think the enemies are, then you're going to know a lot more about how to play in that scenario that you're about to get into. Tip number 3 is about when to go for the revive and when not to. This discretion is everything. How many times have you had your random teammate go for a revive when they're blatantly going to get shot by the enemies and you're screaming, no, no, no? Yeah, that's a really frustrating thing to deal with. And usually this applies to newer players or players who aren't as experienced. But on the flip side, the opposite to this can also be equally as frustrating. When your teammate doesn't go for the revive, stalls in the fight, doesn't actually do anything that was positive, and then they end up dying because they squandered any opportunity that there may have been to revive you, and they wasted it, and then you guys are going back to the lobby. There's not a one-size-fits-all approach here, but if you can learn to listen and focus on when you have a window to revive or when you have a window to fight, you gotta learn to take one or the other. Baiting revives is obviously a tactical strategy that you're gonna wanna incorporate or look out for as you play because you can get your enemy to come to you by just simply making them think that you're going for the revive and you'll be vulnerable. If you're a support legend, you may have a little bit easier of a time. If you're playing one of those support legends who has a special revive animation, well, you may be able to take more risk when it comes to popping the revive than you would on some of the other legends, but it's still something that I see so many randoms screw up. Do not go for the revive if you're in line of sight of your enemies. Do not go for the revive if you don't have enough time to complete the revive. Do not even go for the revive if the enemy is going to be there so soon that they just shoot your teammate who's going to be 1 HP when you get them up. If you take even 30 damage while you're doing the revive animation because the enemy is just arriving at the tail end, it's not worth it because that enemy is going to have so much more of an upper hand on you as soon as you get through with the animation that you're just setting yourself up to be disadvantaged in the fight. Now, if you have a gold knockdown, taking extra risk when it comes to the revive might be something that you're going to want to look for, because taking that 30 damage but getting your teammate up at 100 or 100 plus HP could be a viable strategy if that makes the fight a 2v1 or something like that. Remember though, the revive is the leverage in the fight. If you want to get your enemy to do something like move to you, the leverage is baiting the revive or actually going for it at times. If you leave the revive, a lot of the times you give up some of your leverage, especially if the enemy had a better position than you did. Man, I could talk for so long about this tip because there are so many different scenarios where doing one thing could be the right move, but doing that same thing in a different situation could be the absolute worst thing to do. But if you can remember that you have some leverage in most situations and you're paying attention to the details, then you should wind up all right. Number 4, if you're overlooting, well, expect to get left behind. I guess the same could be true if you loot too fast and your other randoms are taking way too long to loot. But either way, if you're paying attention to what your randoms are doing, this should depict how much time you're spending on looting. Landing on the edge of the map and spending the first third of the game just to get looted up to die to the first team you find is not a fun way to play Apex. Neither is hut dropping with 7 other teams at 1 POI, especially if you can't get any loot in that scenario. Finding a middle ground from both of these situations is usually the optimal experience in Apex. Try to be really aware of how much time you're spending on looting and see what your other teammates are up to as well. If you're getting left behind because you're just being greedy with your loot, well, that's usually a sign you're spending too much time on it. On the flip side, if your teammates are taking too long to loot, well, you're gonna have a tough decision if you want to be the one moving up ahead alone or if you want to wait for them or try to get them to move. A ping or saying something on the mic can go a long way so that everyone starts to get on the same page. Tip number 5. A huge tip that has helped me out while solo queuing is listening to the legend dialogue. The legends will tell you basically everything, even if your teammates will not. Okay, maybe not everything, but they're going to tell you a lot. They're going to tell you when they're taking damage, when they're using abilities, when they're shielding up, if a third party is shooting them, on and on and on. This dialogue can be really helpful to make quick reads on situations that you may not have any other info about. This has helped me immensely. And yes, while at times having the dialogue volume on can be a little annoying from some legends, I think the pros outweigh the cons, especially if you're solo queuing. Sometimes it's really tough to understand what's going on around you in Apex, especially if you're not really experienced and you're solo queuing. But having the legends tell you things actively while it's happening is actually a great addition to the game. I'm glad that Apex made this. Once you're able to pay attention and listen to some of the legend dialogue, be sure to get used to what the sounds are or what the voice lines are for when certain things are occurring. Things such as, well, a lot of the things that I listed before. When they're taking damage, when they're shielding or using health, if you're not in zone, when that third party is shooting you, whatever it may be. If you're not paying attention to this, I feel like you're going to miss out on a lot of crucial info that could help you while you're solo queuing. So definitely be on the listen for legend voice lines. Number 6. I know I told you not to rely on your randoms, and I also know I told you to watch where they're going and what they're actively doing, but you want to try to play off of your teammates whenever possible. This is a general theory, and of course discretion will be used, but Apex at its core is still a team game, and you'll typically have a higher chance of living and thriving if you're going into a smart fight with your squad as opposed to, well, without them. I often think about the attention that my teammates are deriving from the opponents. Occasionally this will happen at times where it's just not really ideal for you to peek out because maybe you need to heal or you acknowledge that the enemies have some pretty good angles on you and your squad mates. But if you notice one of your teammates doing something that draws the attention of 1 or 2 or even all 3 enemies, you need to utilize that window to your advantage. This will take attention that would be on you and it puts them on your teammate. Even if it's for 1 to 3 to 5 seconds, you gotta use this window here. This can potentially allow for some easy kills or easy damage, and it could be the necessary thing that swings a fight for you. Now, this also may sound rather obvious, but far too often often I see players not make these reads correctly. If you see your teammate doing something, you gotta look to see if that's gonna benefit you at the same time. Even if you know what they're doing isn't a smart play, you may never get another opportunity like this again. The best analogy that I make is in the NBA, there's a theory. Well, I guess it could apply to basketball in general. You wanna take the first open shot. That is usually the best opportunity at a shot. If you pass up that first open shot, you may not get the same opportunity again before the shot clock reaches 0. This is the same thing in Apex. If you see your teammates do some damage, you gotta learn to play off of that. You may not get this window of opportunity again. There are plenty of times where I think my random teammate is making the wrong play. And I actually know that to be true, but I also know that because they're moving into the fight further and they're taking attention, I know that this is the only opportunity, while it may not be ideal, that I gotta utilize here. I have to learn to take advantage of this. And even if it falls short, that's gonna be the name of the game while solo queuing. A lot of times things will go poorly. People make a ton of mistakes, and that's just how it's gonna go. You wanna try to minimize that? Well, utilize these tips, but also try to find some friends to play with. However, in most scenarios, it's probably better to play off of them as opposed to not doing that and having them die and leave the game on you. If you're playing ranked, there's probably even more discretion here because you'll have to balance if you want to play for placement at a certain part of the game and understanding that maybe what they're doing is totally not going to result in a win and you just know better. That's a different scenario, but by and far, I'm talking generally here. If your teammates are going in on something, look to probably go in on it with them. So now that you know some of the best tips that I use to solo queue with, be sure to check out these habits that may be holding you back in Apex. I covered it all in this video here. Thanks for watching. Peace.